There are many billionaires in business, but it's often hard to relate to their journeys because they aren't self-made. That's what makes the success story of Howard Schultz both relatable and inspiring. But there's a common misconception about billionaire Howard Schultz and how he got his start at Starbucks. You see, many people don't know this, but Howard Schultz didn't found Starbucks. In fact, he asked for a job there in 1982 when he was 29 years old. To understand how Howard Schultz turned an entry-level sales job into a coffee empire and a net worth of $5.7 billion, we need to look at the 4 stages of Starbucks. And it all begins way back in the 60s. In 1962, a man named Gordon Bowker was traveling across Europe. While visiting a cafe in Rome, he ordered a cappuccino, and immediately he was taken aback by the taste. It was different, amazing, unforgettable. You see, at the time, most Americans drank instant coffee at home, or overcooked coffee at diners. When he returned to the US, he told his 2 friends, Jerry Baldwin and Steve Seagal, about the experience, and came up with the idea of opening up a shop in Seattle. The 3 founders invested and borrowed some money, and in 1971, they opened their first store on Seattle's seafront and named it Starbucks, after the first mate, Starbuck, in Herman Melville's classic novel Moby Dick. However, it wasn't like you're imagining. The original Starbucks store was a coffee roaster. It sold bags of high-quality beans along with the equipment needed to make coffee at home, but they didn't actually make or serve drinks in the actual store. With this business model, growth was slow but steady. By 1981, they had 4 stores all based in Seattle, and the coffee was selling well. So well, in fact, they caught the attention of a man named Howard Schultz. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953, the child of 2 high school dropouts, Howard Schultz grew up in a public housing project. At age 7, Schultz came home one day to find his father laying on the couch after he'd slipped on a sheet of ice, breaking his hip and leg. His father was an army vet and truck driver with no medical insurance, no savings, and in that moment, no hope. It was here that Schultz experienced one of the biggest defining moments in his life. He saw the fracturing of the American dream and watched his parents go through hopelessness and despair. Now, despite his poor upbringing and with his father losing his job, Howard Schultz worked really hard and had managed to make a name for himself. He was the first person in his family to graduate college. And it hadn't been easy at all. To pay for college, he took out loans, worked as a bartender, and even had to sell his blood. After graduating, he worked as a salesman at Xerox for 3 years, and later joined Hammerplast, a Swedish company that sold kitchen equipment and housewares. By 1981, Howard had worked his way up to becoming vice president and general manager of Hammerplast at just 29 years old. One day, Howard noticed a small retailer placing unusually large orders for a Trip coffee maker. It was none other than Starbucks. Starbucks had only 4 stores then, yet it was buying products in quantities larger than Macy's. He was intrigued by the amount of orders this little coffee company was making and went down to one of their Seattle stores one day to check it out for himself. He tried a sample and was immediately hooked. He felt like he had discovered a whole new continent. On his plane ride back to New York, he couldn't stop thinking about Starbucks and described it as a shining jewel. So much so that he reached out to the founders and asked if there was any way that he could fit into Starbucks. The 3 founders of Starbucks were reluctant about bringing in a high-powered New Yorker. Even Howard's mum told him, "You're doing well, you have a future. Don't give it up for a small company nobody's ever heard of." But Howard couldn't let it go, as he saw the huge potential for Starbucks. He kept writing to the founders, and after a year of convincing, Schultz was hired as marketing director for the Seattle business. In his memoir, he wrote, "No great achievement happens by luck." In 1983, Howard was sent to Milan to to attend a housewares show. But little did he know the trip would change his life forever. During his walk to the show, he was impressed with the company's cafes and discovered that Milan alone boasted 1,500 coffee bars. He visited one of the cafes and mimicked someone's coffee order, a cafe latte. He described it as the perfect balance between steamed milk and coffee. No one had ever mentioned this drink to him before. Similar to Gordon, the original Starbucks founder, he was fascinated by the Italian ritual and romance. But whereas Gordon had loved the taste of the coffee and the way it was brewed, Howard fell in love with something different, the experience. He noticed that people go to these coffee shops to relax, to chat with one another, not just to get a quick drink. But what was more striking to him was how the staff seemed to know the customers and called them by name when their drink was ready. As he watched, he had a revelation. Starbucks sold great coffee beans, but they didn't serve coffee by the cup. In his memoir, he wrote, they treated coffee as produce, something to be bagged and sent home with the groceries. They stayed one big step from the heart and soul of what coffee has meant throughout the centuries. No one in America knows about this. I've got to take it back with me.
And I was captured emotionally by the Italian coffee bar, the sense of community, the third place between home and work, and I raced back to America thinking, this is what I'd like to try and do and transform the Italian coffee experience into the American society.
When Howard returned back to Seattle, he quickly told the founders about his revelation, but the only person who thought Howard's idea for Starbucks was a good idea was Howard himself. The founders did not want Starbucks to deviate much from its traditional model of business. They wanted Starbucks to remain strictly a coffee and equipment seller. They felt things were going quite well as they were, so why risk it all, trying to become a cafe that served espressos and cappuccinos? Howard was depressed for months and felt torn between his loyalty to Starbucks and his vision for Italian espresso bars. Eventually, he realized that his vision of bringing the full coffee experience to America just wasn't going to happen with Starbucks. And so, in 1985, Howard Schultz decided to leave Starbucks to start his own company, Il Giornale, the Italian word for newspaper. He wanted to recreate the Italian experience in America, while serving the high-quality coffee of Starbucks. To make his plan a reality, he spent every single minute of his day asking for money, racing from one investor to another. Once again, pretty much everyone told him it was a bad idea. Over a year, Howard spoke to 242 people, and 217 of them said no. Il Giornale? You can't pronounce that name. How could you leave Starbucks? What a stupid move. Why on earth do you think this is gonna work? Americans are never gonna spend $3 for a coffee. Howard's business plan revolved around him selling coffee at $3 per cup, and at this time, coffee generally sold for around 50 cents book up.
I came to you in 1987, and I said to you, I want to build a company with Italian saying words that no one could pronounce for $3 a cup of coffee. Would you invest?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
But I think by now you should have picked up on one thing. It's that Howard Schultz will not give up that easily. And after speaking with hundreds of investors, he finally opened the first Il Giornale coffee bar in 1986. The small, friendly cafe was a hit with Seattle's sophisticated coffee drinkers, who, thanks to Schultz, could get Starbucks coffee by the cup and bags of beans from the real Starbucks down the street. But wait a second, isn't this supposed to be the story of Starbucks? Well, you see, after 2 years of starting his own coffee shop, Howard's luck got even better. Jerry and Gordon decided to sell Starbucks. Schultz was the first person to come to mind, and Baldwin offered him a 90-day exclusive to raise the money.
I was thrilled, and the purchase price was $3.8 million for 6 stores, but I had no money, nothing.
So Howard was once again set out on a mission to raise money from investors. His investors were impressed with the progress that Il Giornale made, so he was confident that some of them would invest more money. And then one day, it nearly all fell apart. Howard almost lost Starbucks before he ever had it. After he had raised about half the funds, Jerry called him in for a meeting. He told Howard that he was approached by a competitive buyer, which happened to be one of Howard's investors from Il Giornale. The anonymous buyer offered Jerry $4 million cash with no due diligence. Devastated by the news, Schultz told his friend, attorney Scott Greenberg, about the situation, who, in turn, told Schultz to visit his firm's offices the next morning.
And he says to me, come to our office tomorrow morning and meet our senior partner. And I said, okay, who is it? And he said, Bill Gates Sr. And I walk into his office and he says, we're going to go for a walk. And I said, where are we going? And he said, we're going to go see the man. And we walked in. I don't know if he called him. I don't know if there was an appointment. I don't know anything. Bill Gates, all 6'7", 6'8", towers over his desk and says, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is not going to go down. You are going to stand down, and this kid is going to realize his dream.
And thanks to Bill Gates' dad, the investor backs down. And in August 1987, Howard Schultz bought Starbucks for $3.8 million. Finally, Howard's vision of bringing the Italian coffee shop experience to America was a reality. And when you zoom out and look at the timeline, you realize what a few years it has been. In 1981, Howard discovered Starbucks. A year later, he joined the team. By 1985, he left the team to start his own coffee company. And now, in 1987, Howard was back at Starbucks, this time as CEO. He was finally the man in charge, ready to shape Starbucks' future. And boy, things were about to get crazy. After taking over as CEO in 1987, Howard began planting the seeds for one of the most ambitious retail expansions in history. He had found a business model that worked, that translated to other geographies, which gave him the opportunity to really accelerate growth. And not just in the US, Howard wanted to take Starbucks global. And by 1998, Starbucks would open stores in Japan, the Philippines, the UK, and more. In the year 2000, Howard stepped down as CEO to focus specifically on global expansion.
We're opening 5 new stores a day.
That's a new store every 5 hours, 24/7.
Yeah.
Between 1998 and 2008, Starbucks grew from 1,900 stores to 17,000. Starbucks was seemingly everywhere. Consumers were increasingly ditching their kitchen mugs for these iconic paper-to-go cups.
One day, every house in America will have their own private plumbing to Starbucks.
Can I help you?
I'd like to get my ear pierced.
Well, better make it quick, kiddo. In 5 minutes, this place is becoming a Starbucks.
Who would have believed that Americans would line up by the millions to pay $4 for a cup of coffee?
Schultz took the chain from just an idea to an entirely new kind of store that hadn't existed before. By then, Starbucks had hit a wall, the 2007 financial crash. That year, the rapid growth screeched to a halt, and Starbucks' stock price plummeted by 50% as cash-strapped consumers ditched their expensive coffee habits. But let's be honest, the financial crisis was far from Starbucks' only problem. This massive expansion over the last decade covered up many mistakes. In a company email that got leaked to the public, Howard identified several issues with the company, including customer dissatisfaction. He mentioned that the quick expansion had led to a watering down of the Starbucks experience. Basically, Starbucks was in a bad state.
And the company found itself in tremendous financial trouble. In less than a year, the people didn't realize it, of facing insolvency.
Starbucks brought back Howard Schultz as CEO. He had spent so many years focused on expansion, and now his strategy was to stop expansion completely. Schultz's goal was to remind customers what they loved about the brand by making the stores an experience, not just a place to get a quick coffee.
Unlike most consumer brands, the brand was really built by the experience.
They stopped selling breakfast sandwiches and brought back in-house grinding, infusing the cafes once again with that fresh coffee aroma. Howard even mandated the removal of the automatic espresso machine. These made service faster, but removed much of the romance and theater of watching baristas craft each cup of coffee. But the biggest decision he ever made was to order Starbucks to close all of its US locations for one afternoon, so he could retrain more than 135,000 baristas about how to make its signature espresso.
And one of the biggest unorthodox decisions we made at the height of our problems is we decided to close every store in America to retrain over 100,000 people. at a cost of $7 million.
Schultz's makeover worked. The company's stock soared more than 143% in 2009, and same-store sales rebounded. Starbucks has posted positive same-store sales ever since, and it's no secret that Starbucks have continued to thrive and expand again. In fact, at the time of this video, they have over 32,000 worldwide stores. But what's possibly even more surprising is where Starbucks is heading. To understand where Starbucks is heading, we need to ask a simple question. What business is Starbucks actually in? If your answer is just coffee, you're wrong. You may be familiar with this scene from the movie The Founder.
You're not in the burger business. You're in the real estate business.
You may even know that McDonald's is one of the best real estate companies the world has ever seen. But have you considered Starbucks as a close second? You see, Starbucks is so good at scouting locations, so much so that there's a so-called Frappuccino effect in real estate, which refers to a significant increase in nearby property prices when a new Starbucks opens. According to the Zillow, in the time a normal home has appreciated by 65%, one near a Starbucks location will have appreciated by 96%. And whilst there's a number of reasons for this, one is that Starbucks has had a great ability to find up-and-coming neighborhoods before the rest of the market. In fact, Starbucks has a team dedicated to selecting new locations for stores based on a wide range of demographic and property data. Their analytical approach has allowed the company to consistently find profitable locations. But this is also a self-fulfilling prophecy because the opening of a Starbucks in a neighborhood can actually change the neighborhood. You've probably noticed this firsthand. After a Starbucks opens up, new restaurants, cafes, and bars start popping up in the same area, thus increasing its perceived value. This, of course, has caused a public backlash against them, with the occurrence of many protests and riots condemning their strategy and accusing Starbucks of ripping out the culture, tradition, and soul of a place by making every town look the same.
There is a bit of a Starbucks blowback.
Sure.
Rolling into town, crushing the life out of the mom-and-pop coffee shop.
But that hasn't stopped Starbucks, and this will likely continue to be an important part of their future as they'll be looking to further expand into new locations they haven't yet reached. But what you might not know is that there is also a second industry Starbucks is in that can reveal even more about why Starbucks has been successful and why they will continue to thrive. Viewed from a financial perspective, Starbucks is far more than a seller of expensive drinks. Starbucks has actually become a bank. You see, instead of paying with cash or credit card, you can deposit money to your Starbucks account on the Starbucks app and use that to pay for your drinks. Doing this gives you more reward points, so you can redeem for more free drinks. Starbucks is the most popular restaurant rewards app, and because of its size and customer loyalty, people are not afraid to keep their money in-app, knowing they'll use it eventually. In fact, there's an estimated $1.5 billion right now in people's Starbucks balances. To put this in perspective, 85% of all US banks have less than $1 billion in total assets. That money will eventually be used to buy coffee, but in the meantime, it provides Starbucks with an interest-free loan that they can heavily invest in growth in a way other companies can't. All this is very scary to regular old banks. The CEO of South Korea's third largest financial group was quoted calling Starbucks an unregulated bank, not a mere coffee company. However, the company's biggest project so far has been its new line of upscale stores, Starbucks Reserve Roasteries. These massive 20,000 square foot stores are designed to be a tourist destination where baristas experiment with different brewing methods and crafting new innovative drinks. And these massive roasteries have proven to be very popular. In fact, the Shanghai Roastery made in its first week an average of $64,000 every day. which is double what a regular cafe makes in a week. So, as you can see, the story of Starbucks is undeniably a success story, and Howard's rise from poverty to billionaire is remarkable. He saw an idea, brought it to a new market, and through hard work, persistence, and great business strategy, built an empire. So if you've ever wondered why Starbucks became a coffee behemoth, why coffee shops with even nicer tasting coffee didn't succeed, the answer is simple. It was never really about the coffee. The reason Starbucks has done so well since Howard took over is that the original founders were focused on the wrong thing. From the moment Howard Schultz became CEO, the first time around, the real product Starbucks sold was the experience. Now, if you want to know how WhatsApp makes money, just click on this video right here. Thank you for watching this video right until the end. Please remember to turn on the notification bell if you want to see more documentaries like this, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video. Cheers!